Amen. You may be seated. The title of my message tonight is When God Changes Plans. When God changes plans. You can imagine being Jonah and hearing the word of the Lord to go to Nineveh, a place that you hated. And I don't have enough time in my sermon tonight to really give you the detail on why Jonah hated Nineveh so much and the Ninevites. But there's a call that conflicted with Jonah's values. There's a call that God gave Jonah that conflicted with his perspective. See, I think sometimes we have a misconception that God is only going to call us to something that we're convicted for, that we have a conviction toward. That God's going to call us to Hawaii because we absolutely love Hawaii, and how dare God call us to Botswana? I don't even like Botswana. And we have a misunderstanding. There are moments, how dare God call us to something that is contrary to our convictions, contrary to what we like, contrary to what we want to do. But there are moments, as we learn from the story of Jonah, there are moments where God will take you out of that place that you so love, even bring you to a place and call you to a place, call you to a thing that is contrary to your passions, your loves, your ideas, even your convictions. You see, Jonah had every right, and even God agreed with Jonah that he had every right to be angry at the Ninevites. But yet God called him to minister the word of the Lord to them anyways. And God didn't look at Jonah and say, oh, Jonah, you know what, Jonah, I'll just go get somebody else. There are other prophets. Jonah wasn't the only prophet. Jonah, I'll go get somebody else that actually wants to see Nineveh saved. No. He called Jonah to Nineveh, even though Jonah hated the Ninevites. So I want us to be very careful, because sometimes God contradicts what we think and what we want and what we want to do and where we want to be, because he has a plan and a purpose. And I'll get into why that's so important here in just a minute. But God calls Jonah to Nineveh, and the final chapters we see Jonah is perched up on this hill watching and waiting. He's perched up on this hill watching and waiting to see whether or not God's going to destroy Nineveh. And as he's perched up there looking, watching, he starts getting hot, and so God provides the shade for him, and he's thankful for it. But see, this is the thing. Jonah was not watching to see Nineveh's redemption. He was watching to see Nineveh's destruction. And for many of us, sad to say, we are in a place in our life where what we are waiting for is not God's redemption. What we're expecting is not God's redemption. What we're expecting and waiting for is God's judgment. And we've got conditioned in our life to expect judgment when we should be conditioned in our life, even knowing, Jonah said it, Lord, I knew your character, I knew your nature, that if I would come here and tell the Ninevites that you would be gracious enough, that you would do this, that you would forgive them of their sins. I knew your nature, God, but still inside of me I was expecting judgment. And it's not that we just get caught up looking at others. Sometimes, even in our own lives, we fall victim. We fall prey to the lies of the enemy, that we actually expect in our life judgment instead of redemption. And we live our lives waiting with this expectation to say, God, you're going to kill me. God, you're going to strike me dead. When God, in his great mercy and his love towards you, because some of you were Ninevites in one moment in your life. Some of you have some Ninevite tendencies. And because we have a misconception of God, we live our life with this expectation of judgment instead of redemption. I don't know what it was in Jonah where he was so hardened. I still try and figure it out at times when I read the story. Why was Jonah so hardened in his life? Why was his heart so hard that he actually was expecting and hoping that God's judgment, he was hoping and praying for a Sodom and Gomorrah experience. He was just waiting to watch and see. But yet God showed mercy and grace. I think the part of this story that so challenges me now is then all of a sudden Jonah's heart is revealed. And God begins to demonstrate to Jonah his heart for the Ninevites. Through this plant and this worm, God demonstrates his heart for the Ninevites. But how is it that, number one, I want us to just focus on this for a moment. How is it that God can change his plans? I want you to think about that for a moment. You see, we serve a God that is sovereign, that in any moment God can change his plans. God can uproot you and move you wherever he wants. Why? He's God. God can decide to bring judgment upon Hawaii or spare Hawaii in any moment. He's God. And many people say, well, you know, God's plans, you know, they're certain. Well, listen, as we look through the Old Testament, we see something so profound. God has this interaction with Moses. And there's this interaction that God has with Moses, and God's like, I'm going to kill all the Israelites right now. And Moses is like, no, God, no. It's like, okay. And then all of a sudden, there's this other time where Moses is like, God, just kill him. And God's like, no, Moses. It's like, what is this all about? Is it that God changes his mind? Or is it that God develops a plan to reveal our heart? Is it times that God has a plan to put us in the right position? Is it at times that maybe God, it seems that God is changing things and messing with stuff, and God, how dare you do this to me? How could you just disrupt everything in my life? But God says, I have a plan. And if you trust me, you'll see the greatest harvest. You'll see the greatest outcome that you could ever imagine, because my plans are true. It may seem as though God changes his mind, but he doesn't. Because in it, the whole time, God has a plan. With Sodom and Gomorrah, when it came to God and Abraham, or Abram having this conversation about Lot. Well, God, if there's this many righteous people, would you spare Sodom and Gomorrah? God's like, okay. Then God, God, what about this many? How many? If there's this many righteous people, okay. How about, but Lord, now, hold on. What about 5? What about 2? You know what I'm saying? He just kept having this interaction with God, bringing the number lower. Anybody understand what I'm talking about? We had kids like that, don't we? He has this interaction with Abraham. Well, Lord, if there's just a few righteous, will you spare Sodom and Gomorrah? And God finally gets to the point where he's like, okay, if there's a few righteous, I'll spare Sodom and Gomorrah. Really? And you know what's interesting? God sent his angels. Now, I have a problem with this story. Because if I was God, my angels wouldn't have walked through town and gone and stayed at Lot's house. I would have just been like, okay, look, there's not enough righteous. You all going down. Shaboom, right? But even in the midst of judgment, listen to this, even in the midst of judgment, God made a way to spare Lot and his family. God even made a way to bring these angels into the city. Could it be possible? I'm just throwing this out hypothetically. And this is just the way my brain works. Could it have been possible that God sent those angels not just to rescue Lot and his family, not just to bring judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah, but maybe to reveal heaven so that people could repent? Because now hear me, before Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, the angels had interaction with the people. Just thinking about it. Think about this for a moment. Because I just believe that God has a plan. God has a plan. But if we're not careful, we'll miss the plan of God. It's not that God changes his mind. We can't change the mind of God. But what we can do is surrender to his plan. And sometimes as we're in these negotiation moments with God, how many of you guys have ever been in those negotiation moments with God? I'm raising my hand. As we're in those negotiation moments with God, you know what the greatest part about those negotiation moments are? Is that it reveals our heart. But what's even greater is it reveals God's. It reveals God's heart. It's amazing how God does that. But tonight I want us to get back to the story, because this is what's so profound to me is here Jonah now has this interaction with God. Jonah's angry at God now. He was angry at God before because he didn't destroy the Ninevites. Now he's angry at God because he allowed a worm. He sent a worm intentionally to eat up the shade that he had. Now, can I just say this? I know this sounds really bad, and you just need to take this with a grain of salt. But sometimes we misinterpret God removing our shade as we're in the wrong spot. Okay, I'll say that again. Sometimes we misinterpret God removing our shade as though we're in the wrong spot, where sometimes God removes our shade to reveal the position of our heart. Sometimes God removes the shade and the comforts of your life to say your heart's in the wrong spot. Your heart's in the wrong place. Now I want you to hear this. This is crazy. Because as soon as all this happened, and here's Jonah having this interaction with God, and all this stuff is taking place, it really ends with God revealing his heart to Jonah. Saying, I'm not going to you're telling me that you're more concerned about your shade perishing and your shade being gone than you are, as valuable as that shade was. Now listen, you ready for this? God made the shade valuable to Jonah. Now hold on for a second. God made the shade valuable to Jonah, and he purposely removed the shade to make a point. Think about that. I want you to think about this for a moment. God made the shade for Jonah. Jonah put great value on the shade, and then God removed the shade on purpose to prove a point. How many of you, God's given you some shade, and you put some value on that shade, and then all of a sudden God removed the shade so he can make a point in your life? And instead of you getting the point, you cuss God out. Instead of getting the point, you never came to a place of revelation. You know the saddest part about this chapter is chapter 4. Jonah chapter 4 is the last chapter in the book of Jonah. But you never see Jonah getting revelation. Think about this for a moment. You never ever see Jonah getting revelation. The last word in the book of Jonah, chapter 4, verse 11, is livestock. The last word in the book of Jonah chapter 4, the last word in the book of Jonah, the last word that we see, the revelation we see in Jonah's interaction with God is the word livestock. It wasn't Jonah getting on his knees before God and repenting. It wasn't Jonah getting some phenomenal revelation going, oh wow, God. You know what it shows? That Jonah was stuck in his condition. The reason why we never, and I'm convinced of this, the reason why we never see Jonah getting a revelation is because Jonah was stuck in his condition. He never repented for the position of his heart. He never repented for the condition of his heart. And even though Nineveh was spared, and even though God tried to teach Jonah a lesson, Jonah's heart was so hard that he never got the revelation. How many of us, now please hear me, I'm about to say something. How many of us are so stuck in our condition that even though God tries to teach us, we never get the revelation? I mean, that's happened to me. so frustrated about something, so lost, so bound in the things that were happening around me, that even though God was trying to teach me, even though God was trying to speak to me, even though God was trying to change my heart and soften my heart was so hard, I never caught the revelation God was trying to give me. And I got stuck in my condition. See, my hope tonight, please hear my heart. My hope tonight is that we'll get the revelation that will change our condition so that we can be everything that God's called us to be. When God changes plans, sometimes it's to reveal your heart, and sometimes it's to reveal His heart. Now, why would God need to go through this whole mess? Why would God need to go through all this stuff in order to reveal Jonah's heart and in order to reveal his heart? Why? Because God was attempting to give Jonah his heart. God wanted to do everything He could. The reason why He went through the whole charades of the shade and the worm and the fish. Come on, I don't know about you, but after 3 days in the belly of a fish, I probably learned my lesson. Sometimes we go through our mess. Sometimes we go through what we would consider the charades of life and having to do all this stuff. God, why are you taking me through this mess? And God's saying, because I'm trying to get you to a place where I can transplant my heart into yours. See, this is the sad part about the story of Jonah, is he did it, but he missed it. I'll say that again. The sad thing about the story of Jonah, he finally did it. He finally did what God instructed him to do, but failed to get God's heart. He did it. He prophesied. He gave the word of the Lord to Nineveh, and then he waited. He did it, but he missed it. How many of us, we do it, but we miss it? Is this too heavy of a word for Sunday night? I'm so sorry. Like, happy, joy, happy. I don't know about you, but there have been moments in my life where I did it, but I missed it. God, I did everything you told me to do. I said everything you told me to say, but I missed it. Why? Because sometimes it's not necessarily that God is trying to get for you to say what He wants you to say, but He wants you to get His heart. And how many times have we done all the right things, but we miss the main ingredient, which is getting God's heart? He did it, but he missed it. The disconnect was in his inability to get God's heart for Nineveh. The whole point of this story, everything Jonah goes through, why God selected Jonah to go to Nineveh, why when Jonah turned his back on God and said, God, I'm not going to Nineveh, I'm going to Tarshish, God chased after Jonah and said, Jonah, you're going to Nineveh. Created, you ready for this? Caused a storm to come, forcing Jonah to be thrown in by the cast and the crew, thrown into the ocean, and God sends a fish to swallow Jonah. Then, are you ready for this one? Then takes him not to the shores of Nineveh. If I was God, I would have taken that fish and directed him to Nineveh and had some Ninevite catch that fish, like 20 Ninevites catch that fish, bring that fish into the middle of the town, gut that fish open, and there's Jonah, and be like, repent. You guys know what I'm talking about? I would just make some big like show out of it. It was just like some spectacle. Jonah gets out, and he's like, repent. Right? Anybody know what I'm talking about? All the Ninevites would be like, ah! That's what I would have done, but God didn't do that. Listen to all the stuff God puts Jonah through. God has the fish spit Jonah back out, far away from Nineveh, so that God could take another opportunity to give Jonah another chance. So then he comes to Jonah again and says, Jonah, will you go? And Jonah finally was like, reluctantly says, fine, God, I'll go. Why? I don't want to get swallowed by another fish. Obviously, I'm going. And so he goes. He says what God tells him to say. He does it all. He goes through all that to get it done. And don't you think that God would be happy with Jonah doing what God told him to do? Like, God, aren't you satisfied? And aren't there moments in our life where it's almost like we look at God and we do everything he instructed us to do, but we're like, God, why aren't you satisfied with this? I said what you told me to say. I did what you told me to do. I went where you told me to go. God, why is it that we have a disconnect here? And he says, the problem is not me, the problem is you. Because Jonah, you can do all the right things, say all the right things, be in all the right places, but if you don't have my heart, then it's nothing. Are you with me? And I get this story. I'm looking at this thing going, oh, Lord, how many times have I done this? And I ignore all the signs of God leading me, God doing all these different things. And I find myself backtracking because I'm like, okay, Lord, you did this miracle. You did that. You did this. You called me to that. I did it, Lord. It's done. It's completed. Check. It's done. And we create checklists with God. Anybody else have a checklist with God? Praise God, I'm not the only one. All right. Just making sure. My wife, can I go here? Okay. My wife is amazing. My wife is absolutely amazing. She's incredible. I have the greatest wife on the planet. But we had a situation. Okay, we had a situation. Now, I'm just the kind of guy, okay, that what I want to hear from my wife when she leaves the house is, baby, I love you. I can't wait to see you later on. You're so wonderful. I'm going to miss you so much. And then I sit there, you know, in my manhood, listening, going, yeah, that's right. And your wife leaves with you feeling like a man, feeling like a macho man. That's right. My wife loves me. She sees me for who I is. Yeah, everybody understand what I'm talking about? But we had a problem because that's what I was wanting. But many of you husbands understand what I'm about to talk about. And the last thing that my wife would spout out as she was walking out the door is, hey, babe, don't forget to do the dishes. If you can mop this up and also put the clothes in the dryer or the washer into the dryer. All right, bye. And I'm sitting now, instead of feeling like a macho man, you know what I'm saying? And see, it's not her problem. It's not her issue. But for some of us, that's how we treat God. And that was a big like, ooh. I'm not saying you do that. It's sometimes we as individuals. But sometimes we feel the same with God. And we hear certain things from God, and we're like, okay, God, I did my checklist. God, I did this, I did that. But see, we forget something. You see, my wife, sometimes we forget, I forget as a husband, that one of her love languages is act of service. And the husbands go, ooh. One of her love languages is acts of service. And you know what she was doing? She wasn't giving me a checklist. She was revealing her heart. Say, hey, baby. Yeah, bear with me for a second. What she's saying when she's walking out that door is, baby, I know what you want, and I got what you want, but you got to give me what I want. So was that with enough finesse on that? What was my wife doing? She was revealing her heart. See, the mistake that Jonah made is he did everything on the checklist, but he missed the heart. How many times as Christians we do everything on the checklist, but we miss the heart? We're so disconnected from the heart of God. Jonah did everything right, but he missed God's heart. Pastor, I fed the poor this week. Pastor, I prayed for someone this week. Pastor, I came to 3 church services this week. God better be pleased with me. Now, I know nobody here does. I'm talking to the empty seats right now. I'm just letting you know. I know nobody struggles with this, but sometimes we go through and all these things that God has instructed us to do, we see them and we're like, okay, good, I'm going through my list. I'm doing all the spiritual and things that I know I'm supposed to do. Those who do good, those who don't do good, it's sin. And so I want to do good. And so I'm going through my law checklist. I'm obeying all the commandments. I'm obeying all the church policies and procedures. I'm doing everything that I'm supposed to be doing, and I'm good. So God, you better be pleased. And God's looking at what you're doing, looking at what you're saying, look at where you're going is an abomination because you're doing it all right, but you got the wrong. Because sometimes it's not about the doing. Sometimes it's about the being. What do you mean? Sometimes God wants you to have His heart instead of just do everything that you're instructed and required to do. He wants you to be His child. He wants you to be His heart. He wants you to be His heart to this island and to this generation. He doesn't just necessarily need you to do everything He needs you to do. He needs you to be. He needs you to be. See, what God needed what God needed from Jonah wasn't just for Jonah to do the prophet. I'm doing prophet right now. Stepping on the scene. Ninevites, you're going to hell. That's what he did. He told them all. You're all going to be destroyed. God is going to destroy you. He did it. Problem was this. He might have done the prophet thing, but he wasn't truly a prophet. Why? Because a prophet would have approached the situation with a different heart. See, what I love about this prophetic conference that's coming up is these people can just come and prophesy. But what we sometimes forget about is they're not coming here just to declare a word of the Lord over your life. They're coming here to release God's heart for you. See, we're not just telling people about Jesus. We've come to release God's heart. I don't want to be Jonah. I don't want to be Jonah. I don't want to be a man that does it but misses it. I want to be a man that has God's heart. I don't want us to just be a church that does it. Oh, Pastor, we got a bus ministry. We got Aloha Fest. We got 1,000 people from the projects in our church, Pastor. And we do it all. But we miss it. We can have all 800 seats in this place filled with people, and we can do church, but miss it. You can do Christianity, but you can miss it. Are you getting this tonight? Is it starting to sink in? Don't be a Jonah. Don't miss it. The whole point of the exercise, the whole point of the story ends with God telling Jonah, Jonah, you missed my heart. The whole story ends not with Jonah getting a revelation, but God telling Jonah, sadly, Jonah, you did it, but you missed my heart. Can you imagine one day when we stand before God? Say, well, Josh Morocco, you did it. 10,000 people in your church there in East Oahu. You affected an entire island. You changed governments. It was awesome. Morocco, you did it. But you missed it. Gets real, doesn't it? You know what I really want for all of us is that we hear from the Lord, son, you got my heart. Son, you got it. Might have taken a fish, but you got it. Might have taken me messing up your shade and your comfort and getting you out of your comfort zone and messing with your comfort. But son, you got it. You got my heart. And tonight, this is what I want to pray. Is that tonight, we'll get a revelation. And the revelation is to get God's heart. To get God's heart for this island. To get God's heart for this church. To get God's heart in our call and our purpose. To get God's heart. Sometimes when plans change in your life, sometimes when it seems that God is changing his plans, we need to stop and go, God, is there a heart that I need to get in this? Obviously, things are changing, Lord. So it must mean what you're trying to do is reveal your heart to me so that the thing I get out of this is I get your